Hello and thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Redlands Coast annual candle lighting vigil for 2020. We're here to mark this solemn occasion as the Redlands Coast community has done every year since 2005, when this statewide simultaneous candle lighting event began. Even though this year we may not be able to meet in person this evening, it's really important that we continue to mark the beginning of Queensland's Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month. While we are all physically isolating to protect our health, there are currently many vulnerable victims of domestic violence whose safety is at heightened risk as they remain out of sight behind closed doors. I will talk more on this shortly, but firstly I would like to begin by acknowledging the Quandamooka people, and on your behalf pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Connection to country, like every other aspect of our lives, finds new expression at this time. I'm joined here by Betty Taylor, CEO of the Red Rose Foundation, who will add her voice to this virtual event, after which we will together light our candles to pay respects to those women, men and children who have tragically lost their lives to domestic and family violence. So wherever you are, please join with us in lighting your own candles as we ensure this important tradition continues. We will also bring to you presentations from Stacey Ross from the Centre for Women and Co, and the Honourable Di Farmer, Minister for the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence. There are many individuals and organisations whose voices you may be accustomed to hearing and whose presence is usually felt at our candle lighting vigils. They are still with us this evening, and I thank them for their contributions that they make to the fight against the scourge of domestic violence to which our Redlands Coast community is not immune. For their year-round support of those affected by domestic and family violence, and their involvement in raising awareness and in essential fundraising efforts, I acknowledge my fellow councillors, Maybank Accommodation and Crisis Support Services, Redlands Centre for Women, our Queensland Police Service and other emergency service providers, the Redlands City Choir, the Centre for Women and Co, which continues to do an amazing job here in our Redlands Coast, Sir Optimists International, local Zonta and other service clubs, and of course, DV Connect. We meet on the first Wednesday of every May for an important reason, one that is never more apparent than this challenging time for our community. The COVID-19 pandemic, with its social isolation restrictions, is causing disruption for each and every one of us. Many households have lost their incomes, and many of those fortunate enough to still have their jobs are working from home, often while juggling the responsibilities of homeschooling. All of these things can add additional stress to those already experiencing domestic or family violence, with many victims now locked in 24/7, without the reprieve often brought from the outlets of work and school, and they are also very much out of sight from their normal support people and the services. Many vulnerable people who may be living with a controlling family member are now at a greater risk of this behaviour escalating into violence. Now, more than ever, we need to keep those who have paid the ultimate price of domestic violence in our hearts and in our minds, so this already unacceptable hidden epidemic doesn't escalate and victims don't feel like they have no place to go. I continue to be inspired by the extreme generosity of our Redlands Coast locals. They dig deep to help those affected by domestic and family violence. And as many of you know, this is a cause that's very close to my heart. Our most recent Dinero en Rouge annual fundraising event in May last year raised $70,000, bringing the total of our 5 events to over $300,000. I was proud to present Redlands Coast Maybank Accommodation and Crisis Support Service with a cheque for $250,000 at last year's event. These funds were used to contribute to 4 new crisis accommodation units, which was opened earlier this year. We simply do not have enough crisis accommodation in our city, and these Maybank units will make such a difference. But so much more is needed. Sadly, with the current restrictions, key fundraising activities like Dinero en Rouge are unable to be held. But I assure you, we will be redoubling our efforts when we are in a position to do so. It is really heartening that the state government is taking urgent action at a time when local fundraising and other vital activities are limited, both due to social isolation restrictions and our economic uncertainty. This was really evident at the DV Summit, which was held virtually today. We know that there will be an increase in demand for our services arising from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we welcome Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk's announcement to inject almost $5.5 million to help address this. The capacity of the 24/7 statewide crisis service, DV Connect, will be boosted, including Women's Line and Men's Line and other online support. Crisis accommodation needs will be addressed to free up space in shelters, and a new awareness campaign will be undertaken. These are all extremely welcome initiatives. Mission Australia, in its 2019 Out of the Shadows report, asserted that domestic violence was still a leading cause of homelessness, particularly for women and children. 121,000 people who had experienced domestic and family violence across Australia sought help from specialist homelessness services in 2018. While domestic and family violence can affect anyone, overwhelmingly, in 75% of reported cases, violence is perpetrated by men against women. This leaves women and children at great risk of homelessness. Despite growing awareness of domestic and family violence in recent years, prevalence rates remain high. Approximately 17% of women and 6% of men have experienced violence by a partner since they were 15. And this was before the extra stress of the current pandemic. While we often hear about the most tragic cases when they make media headlines, there are also stories of survival, of breaking the cycle, and the strength and resilience this requires that need to be told. Domestic and family violence cannot go on. We cannot let it go on. So today, I urge you all to reflect on those who have lost their lives to domestic violence, and to be an active part of the movement to prevent further senseless and unnecessary deaths. I ask each and every one of you to do what's in your power to do, and to help wherever you can. I would now like to hand over to Betty Taylor, CEO of the Red Rose Foundation, and a really strong advocate for those affected by domestic violence, to share her insights, her wisdom, and her grief.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here for this very different candlelighting this year, a virtual candlelighting. Even though we're not gathering as the crowds as we normally do, we are at home, but we're still remembering. The sentiment behind the National Day to remember victims of domestic violence is still real. Last year in Australia, 74 women, 8 men and 24 children lost their lives to violence in the home. A shocking statistic. We can't let this go by. We can't let current events overtake the reality that domestic violence is still there, ever present in our homes, that people still live with the shocking reality of abuse every day. We remember those who've tragically lost their lives. We remember families left grieving. We remember families that are wrecked by domestic violence. We remember victims who endure such abuse that their life is wrecked by physical injuries, emotional torment. And as we light our candles, can we just remember that it is there in our homes, in our communities, and in our workplaces. We must do everything we can to stop this and to change the ending. We can all have a role to play. We all know someone affected by domestic violence. We can all step up, speak out, and do something to change this. Thank you, everyone.
We are now joined by Stacey Ross, CEO of Centre for Women & Co, who continues to support and empower women and their families on our Redlands coast.
Hello and thank you for joining us. My name's Stacey and I'm the CEO of the Centre for Women & Co. The Centre for Women & Co is the regional domestic and family violence and women's health service for Redlands and the Logan regions. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather here tonight, whether you are across Queensland or afar, and pay my respects to elders past, present and those emerging. Tonight we come together to pay our respects to the precious lives lost at the hands of domestic and family violence. We spend this time acknowledging the complexity of this issue and the dangerous threat that so many are affected by. Whether you are a survivor, a family member, friend, someone who is currently experiencing any form of violence, a frontline worker supporting those who are seeking safety, or a government official working on changing legislation to better protect our community, all of us, on some level, are touched by domestic and family violence. Earlier this year, we collectively felt the deep sadness when news broke of the murder of Hannah Clark and her children. Indescribable violence and the loss of life continue as we on the front line hear harrowing stories every day. With the unknown landscape of COVID-19 upon us, we are experiencing further complexities in supporting women and families to be safe. The Centre for Women's current clients range from a 3-year-old boy to the elderly, a woman in her 80s. These people who access our services are from all walks of life, and it is important that we remember that domestic and family violence doesn't discriminate. Every day, the Centre for Women walks alongside families and everyone or anyone, empowering them to live the lives they deserve without violence and to lead a happy and healthy life. It is critical that our community share in our messaging that enough is enough and that domestic and family violence is not acceptable. We all have a part to play in making sure that our communities are safer. We continue to do all that we can to help and assist, and we will never stop providing this support to those in need. Acknowledging the lives lost is an important part of their story and ours as a community. It is our privilege that we are here for them, representing and acknowledging them, to show our support and that we hold the candle for them, burning bright in their memory. So wherever you are tonight and however you have connected in, we thank you. We now invite you to place an image of a red rose or a heart in the comment section of this feed in memory of those who have lost their lives across Australia. Take care, everyone, and thank you from everyone at the Centre for Women.
Minister for the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence, Di Farmer, has been very generous in supporting our community organisation ahead of Domestic and Family Violence Prevention Month. It is my great pleasure to now invite our Minister to say a few words.
May is Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence Month. It is such an important month to remember all of those people who died as a result of domestic and family violence, and to remember their family and their loved ones that they've left behind. It's also a month where we remind ourselves that we all have a responsibility to do something about domestic violence. The Redlands City Council, Women and Co, and the Red Rose Foundation are banding together to hold a candlelight vigil to remember all of the victims who have died. We're asking you to join them and to join people from all over Australia to light a candle to mark this event. That is going to be your way of saying you put your hand up to say no to domestic and family violence. Life for a domestic violence victim is even more complicated under COVID-19. Demand on services has been huge, and it's for this reason that the Palaszczuk government has just provided multi-million-dollar funding boost to help support services to meet that demand. And I thank all of those services right across Queensland for the work that they have done and that they will be doing. If you've got something to say about how you think we could be meeting the demands that COVID-19 is placing on victims and on services, please go to the survey that's going to be opening on Monday. Go to the Queensland Government website, not now, not ever, together. That's what we say about DB. Please be part of this.
Let us now join together in lighting our candles in memory of those who have lost their lives to domestic and family violence and observe a minute's silence in their honour. That concludes our Redlands Coast candle lighting for 2020. Thank you to all of our speakers and all of you who have taken part in this solemn proceedings this evening. Please keep those who have lost their lives to domestic and family violence, those for whom we have lit our candles, in your hearts and in your prayers. Good evening.